Today I'd like to talk about some basic ideas that may help you understand organizations and how they are structured and restructured. Structural theorists are concerned with how organizations are designed to coordinate work using hierarchical levels of authority as well as vertical and horizontal patterns of communication. Modern post-World War II structural theorists built upon the work of Fayol, Taylor, Gulick, and Weber, who espoused the virtues of organizational efficiency, rationality, and goal attainment. Burns and Stalker characterized this dimension of organizations as mechanistic, and Blau and Scott described them as formal. For all practical purposes, these terms are interchangeable. Modern structural theorists were also influenced by the work of human resource theorists, including Mary Parker Follett and Roethlisberger and Dixon, who discovered that the needs of individual workers influenced productivity and contributed to the notion of social groups. This notion contributed to the idea of the informal organization, or organic aspect of organizations. In addition, modern structural theorists acknowledge that organizational structures, internal arrangements, and behavior can't be isolated from forces in the external environment. Mintzberg and others note that because organizations are involved in different types of work and encounter different external environmental circumstances, they evolve different organizational forms. Let's take a few minutes to examine Bowman and Deal's assumptions of structural organizations, review the characteristics of formal mechanistic organizations and informal organic organizational structures, as well as briefly talk about the influence of the external environment on organizations. My intention is to help you understand the dynamic interplay among and between these elements that determine organizational structures. Bowman and Deal identify 6 basic assumptions of the structural frame, including organizations are rational institutions and exist to achieve goals and objectives. Organizations increase efficiency and enhance performance through specialization and appropriate division of labor, rules, and formal authority to control and coordinate work. Suitable forms of coordination and control ensure that the diverse efforts of individuals mesh. Organizations work best when rationality prevails over personal agendas and extraneous pressures. Structures must be designed to fit an organization's current circumstances, and problems arise and performance suffers from structural deficiencies, which can be remedied through analysis and restructuring. The term mechanistic systems, like the name implies, are inflexible and are better suited to predictable environments and routine work. Burns and Stalker outline 2 management systems that describe how organizations may be structured to meet different work environmental demands. Their discussion of mechanistic systems suggests that they are appropriate for stable conditions and routine work. The notion of mechanistic systems reflects the work of Frederick Taylor, Max Weber, and Erwick and Gulick. 1. Specialization. Work is broken down into functional tasks. 2. Technical competence is focused on improving work. 3. Supervisory levels in the hierarchy assure compliance and performance. 4. Functional roles and responsibilities are defined. 5. Hierarchical structure defines levels of authority, control, and communication patterns. 6. Top-down executive decision-making. 7. Vertical communication between superior and subordinates. 8. Superiors decide how and what work is done. 9. Loyalty and obedience to superiors is a condition of membership, or otherwise employment. And 10. Internal local company knowledge and skills are valued more than general cosmopolitan experiences. In general, managers of mechanistic systems feel more in control of the organization and secure in dealing with their external environment. Organic systems, on the other hand, are more adaptive. When organizations are faced with rapidly changing conditions that give rise to new problems and unforeseen requirements, an organic organizational form may be useful. Organic systems have less rigidity and provide for greater levels of worker participation that help to create climates and management systems that support innovation. Here are some of the characteristics of organic systems. 1. Individuals contribute special knowledge and experiences to the task. 2. Tasks are defined, continually redefined in relation to others. 3. Responsibility for organizational success is shared by everyone in the organization. 4. A community of interest defines authority, control, and communication. 5. Knowledge and expertise reside at all levels of the organization. 6. Lateral versus vertical communication patterns prevail. 7. The content of communication is advice rather than instructions and decisions. 8. An ethos of commitment to progress is more highly valued than loyalty and obedience. And finally, 9. Prestige is linked to external recognition of expertise. Managers in organic systems face greater uncertainty, and although they are not as hierarchic as mechanistic organizations, they do remain stratified according to seniority based on experience and expertise, with senior staff taking the lead on accomplishing tasks. Mechanistic and organic systems are polar opposites and are used to illustrate different organizational structures that may be suitable for very different external environmental conditions. Neither is superior under all conditions. Thus, there are no optimum management systems that are suitable for all situations. Rather, there are many different types of organizational structures that fall between the mechanistic and organic models that fit unique circumstances, and indeed, there are organizations that operate with both mechanistic and organic systems. Universities are an excellent example in that they have large bureaucratic organizational mechanistic structures that handle routine work, and organic systems or professional bureaucracies that handle the academic side of the organization, and they are based on expertise. Let's take a brief look at professional bureaucracies. As I mentioned, universities are a good example of them. First, there are a few levels between the top of the hierarchy, the president, and the operating core, the faculty. Second, it is a decentralized structure. Third, it uses professional indoctrination, including culture, norms, values, and beliefs, as a means of induction and control. Fourth, support staff serve professionals who carry out the primary responsibility of the organization, including teaching, research, and service. And finally, fifth, externally recognized expertise is the basis of prestige and insulates professionals from bureaucratic interference. This bifurcated system makes changes slow and difficult. Standardization of teaching and content conflicts with academic freedom and may conflict with the client's needs, which may in turn jeopardize accreditation. However, faculty may rapidly infuse new knowledge into courses to match advances in disciplines and fields of study. Compare the characteristics of mechanistic and organic organizations. On the left, you can see mechanistic organizations or bureaucratic characteristics. On the right-hand side, organic organizations are described in professional terms. Again, these characteristics depict opposite ends of the organizational continuum. In reality, most organizations will fall somewhere in between these two extremes. Several other ideas are pervasive in the literature, including formal and informal organizations. All organizations have both formal and informal elements, And even though they are separate dimensions, they are inextricably intertwined and essential to understanding and leading complex organizations. According to Argyris and Schoen, organizations are comprised of individuals who define its membership and establish rule-governed ways of making decisions to take collective action. There are two main elements to an organization: its formal structure, which is characterized by hierarchy and bureaucracy, and its informal structure, characterized by shared norms, values, and beliefs that guide collective conduct. The structure of an organization may be described by different theorists using different terms, including bureaucratic, Weber, mechanistic, Burns and Stocker, and formal, Blau and Scott. However, they refer to essentially the same characteristics of administrative machinery: hierarchy, managerial authority, span of control, rules, regulations, and policies. Blau and Scott make an important point. They note that organizations vary in size and complexity and consequently influence the size of the bureaucracy and the amount of energy consumed in maintaining it. In other words, the larger the organization, the larger the bureaucratic structure, and the greater the demand for maintaining itself in relation to the organization's resources. The informal organization is based on understanding of culture. Schein defines culture as a pattern of basic assumptions invented, discovered, or developed by a given group as it learns to cope with problems of external adaptation and integration that has worked well enough to be taught to new members as a correct way to perceive, think, and feel in relation to their problems. The informal organization exhibits norms, values, and beliefs and practices that may be influenced by the formal organization, referred to as official norms, or they may be developed by multiple and diverse social groups within the organization, which are referred to as unofficial or informal norms. These regulate performance and productivity. One of the most important ideas in the study of organizations examines the influence of the external environment on the structure of organizations. Very briefly, the external environment provides raw materials, including students and public funding to schools, and it produces literate and numerate citizens. Also, the boundary between the organization and the environment is permeable. For example, schools have constituencies or parents, interest groups that influence education policies and decisions. Also, the logic of confidence, or what schools should be like, inhibits altering existing structures. In addition, organizations vary in the degree to which they are influenced by the external environment. For example, public schools are influenced more by citizens than are private corporations. And public funding is more stable, and thus schools are less vulnerable to economic changes than private businesses. There is an axiom in the organizational literature that conveys a basic truth. The greater the level of turbulence in the external environment, the greater the need for flexibility to enable organizations to adapt and change its structure. Popular wisdom, however, of educational reform was to tighten up, ensure accountability, re-centralize decision-making, rather than rethink how we educate children, including how we restructure schools to enhance learning. It seems to be a recurring problem facing public school and public sector organizations. Restructuring is one of the most common approaches to organizational change and requires an understanding of external forces for change and internal tensions among various structural parts of the organization. An interplay between the two will determine the final outcome. Understanding these dynamics is essential to leading successful restructuring efforts. I would like to note that we will discuss the external environmental and systems theory in greater detail in another seminar. What I'd like you to do now is think about the unchanging nature of bureaucratic organizations. Read the brief, History and Organizations, Why We Do Things the Way We Do, on the next slide. I hope this gives you some insight into why we do the things we do and how difficult organizations are to change. Who would have thought that Roman war chariots influenced the size of a solid rocket booster for the United States space program? I would like you to compare and contrast the strengths and weaknesses of the mechanistic and organic systems and reflect on differences between management and leadership required to make them work. Let's see if we can apply what we know. Given that most schools and universities have both mechanistic and organic characteristics, discuss how leaders in your organization balance the need to be effective managers and leaders who enable the organizations to adapt to change. It's interesting to note that management and leadership are not mutually exclusive, but complementary functions. And most importantly, let's talk about problem solving. Identify external environmental factors that are presently having an impact on your organization and assess the urgency required to address them by changing the structure of your organization.